Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, Anthony Peake, talking about how you're going to live forever. So, Anthony, we were just talking about the brain. Everybody's brain is in two halves. Normally, these two halves are joined a bit by this corpus callosum.
Yeah.
But when the corpus callosum is cut, it doesn't kill you. You carry on, except you've got kind of two personalities in there. You've got the me, the I, that lives in the left-hand side of the brain in most people, not exclusively, it could be switched around. Yeah. And you've got something else that doesn't make much of a show of itself in the right-hand side of the brain.
Correct.
In most people,
yes.
But it could be the other way around. So, what is this thing?
This is the being I call the daemon. And I call it the daemon because quite by chance, I was given a copy of a book called The Jesus Mysteries by Timothy Freak and Peter Gandy. And in this book, there is a section on ancient Greek and Gnostic belief systems. And in this, they suggest that ever since probably 3rd or 4th century BC, there's been a belief system that there are two personalities in the brain. Not only that, but this other personality is your guiding spirit. And the ancient Greeks used to call it the daemon. And indeed, the Romans called it the genius.
Do you think this is also maybe something like a guardian angel?
It is a guardian angel. It's exactly the same principle. And when people have angelic encounters, I would argue that angelic encounters are part and parcel of the same phenomenon. Because what I suggest is that the daemon can project itself three-dimensionally into space during times of crisis, and it can communicate with you as best it can. Indeed, you may be aware that in near-death experience there's something called the being of light. And the being of light is when somebody starts to die, they will see a figure that will come towards them that either may be a religious figure, it may be a close friend that may have died. Indeed, in many cases, it's also been a pet animal. And in other cases, it's somebody who's still alive. But what this being does, it's there to calm you down. Now, effectively, again, it's like the guardian angel, it's like the spirit idea. And this is the daemon. And the daemon is somebody who is your greater self. It's something, it's the larger being, it's the hidden observer. There are many, many terms that have been used. But the ancient Greeks used this term daemon and eidolon, which was carried through by this schismatic Christian sect called the Gnostics. And the Gnostics, if you read the Gnostic Gospels, which are very, very popular because they've spun off now into the Da Vinci Code and such like.
And the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail.
Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. What is central to all this is the idea of this duality. Now, I have suggested recently that the Holy Grail is not, in fact, either the bloodline of Christ, nor is it the chalice that the blood of Christ landed in. It's this belief in duality. And I believe the Cathars, the Cathari, who were the people that were massacred in the 13th century in the Albigensian heresy in southern France, the secret of these people was the duality idea. And that's what they died for. And that's why Orthodox Christianity have problems with Gnosticism. You read the Nag Hammadi texts, you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's full of this idea of daemon and eidolon.
Well, I'm just wondering, because the Knights Templar were supposed to talk to a head.
The Baphomet.
Yeah, Baphomet.
A goat of Mendes, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. But it wasn't a living head.
It was supposedly.
Could it possibly be? And perhaps I'm going a little too far with this theory here.
No, it can apply to so many things because it fulfills so many of the aspects of a lot of belief systems. In fact, in the second book, I deal with just how universal this concept is. You'll find it right across the world, from tribes in sub-Saharan Africa to tribes in Amazonia. You find it in First Nation culture in America.
I did have a text that's gone off screen, unfortunately, that's asked a question about the tribes in Australia, you know, the Aboriginal.
The Aborigines have the same concept. But the most fascinating group of individuals that have this concept is something called the Huna. And the Huna tradition is in Polynesia and specifically in Hawaii. And I was stunned when I first was informed about this nature of duality that they believe in there. I was first told by a Swiss guy, and there's a friend of mine called Gary, who also works on this idea. And these guys have actually got my theory and have known about it for hundreds and hundreds of years. They say that your own higher self has lived your life before and it guides you and it's there for you. The question is opening up the gates of communication, the doors of communication.
But it doesn't want to necessarily communicate, does it?
That's the big issue.
I mean, what I need to ask, I suppose, is if you're here for a purpose, if you're living this life for a purpose, then if they kind of interfere, they're taking the purpose away, aren't they?
Well, what you're doing here is you're going to a philosophical concept called teleology. The idea that everything has a purpose and there's a reason for everything. There is a reason. I use the wonderful analogy, going back to Groundhog Day again. In Groundhog Day, the movie, what he does is he lives the same day over and over again.
It's my favourite movie.
Yeah,
I've seen it very many times.
I'm now in contact with Danny Rubin, who is the writer of that movie, and Danny's given me quite a few interesting insights into how and why he wrote that movie.
Well, please ask him why Phil Connors doesn't kill anybody.
That is a great question, isn't it?
It is a great question. I want the answer.
And it could be, as you've rightly said, that it could be that people wouldn't identify with him.
Yes, I think it might well be that.
But he might have done all those iterations, he might have done. But effectively in the movie, it's profoundly moralistic, because as Connors lives the day over and over again, initially he starts to use it to advantage and to his own advantage, as does the character in Grimwood's novel Replay. And he lives his life over and over again, and he does it for his own advantage. But as he lives the life over and again, he starts to do good for doing good's sake, as if he's karma, as in K-A-R-M-H, you know, karma as in that. And as if he's developing and becoming a better human being. And I suggest, and it's only a suggestion, is that over many, many lives, what you do is you become a unified being. Your daemon and your eidolon are split, but after a time, you become a single being again. And maybe that's when you move on. And maybe that's when you move on to the next level. In fact, if you go...
Oh, so there is some hope, because I was a bit concerned when I read this book. I thought, well, you know, it's very scientific and it's quite hard to argue against it. However, I'm not all that great about the idea of constantly living the same life.
But you don't live the same life, and this is the crucial point.
Yeah, but that's the other thing. Are you in the same time?
Yes.
Well, what about the other people? Because if you're living your life differently, if your daemon knows that your life was like this, the daemons for the other people that you deal with might not allow you to meet them anymore and have, say, relationships of some kind with them.
Okay, let's just think through the concept here. If the universe is eternal, let's say for argument's sake that the universe works in cycles and it works within eternity, and eternity goes on forever.
But time is relative.
But time is relative, but whatever the backdrop is, there is an eternity. In which case, every possible event can and will take place. In fact, I was reading a book on cosmology only recently, and they were saying that effectively the latest theories in cosmology suggests that we all have doppelgangers that are existing in alternative universes, but they're so far away from us that we'll never ever communicate with them.
But we make decisions every microsecond.
Yeah.
So there would be infinite numbers of me and infinite numbers of you living very similar but slightly different lives. You know, there might be one of me interviewing somebody who's a bit like you wearing a red shirt.
Spot on.
You know, which is kind of like a bit pointless, isn't it?
But this is the many worlds interpretation of particle physics, suggested by a guy called Hugh Everett III in 1957. And Hugh Everett III, you know, I was going on about the observer, and the observer observes, and it makes the consciousness, the wave function collapse.